al-Shara barely addressed this week the pain and fear many of Syria's minorities feel around the country as the country undergoes waves of sectarian violence. And I want to spotlight the Druze community in particular, which during a series of escalating tensions back in July came under an unprecedented violent attack in Suwaida in southern Syria. Now, our own CNN technical director and editor Raid Balan is from Suwaida, and through his lens we've put together the story of Druze civilians who were caught in the crossfires of government-affiliated and militia violence, and a warning that this report contains disturbing and graphic video. This is Suwaida in southern Syria a decade ago, through the eyes of a CNN producer. Life followed a simple rhythm. Farmers in their fields, vineyards under the sun. Ancient cities dotted the hills, echoes of Suwaida's deep history. Home to Syria's Druze community, an ethnic religious minority in the Levant, but where people of all faiths lived in peace. Churches and mosques stood side by side. From quiet countryside to a city alive with music and daily life. A pocket of relative peace and semi-autonomy, while much of Syria was engulfed in civil war. In July 2025, all of that changed. Suwaida woke to a different sound. Tensions between Druze and Bedouin groups erupted into sectarian violence. Troops and militia affiliated with the new Syrian government, which had overthrown Bashar al-Assad, marched towards the city to stop the fighting. The Interior Minister called it a, quote, national mission to protect civilians and restore order. But Druze civilians say they bore the brunt of the violence at the hands of government-aligned fighters. They reported gruesome attacks, which they viewed as part of a systemic persecution against several minorities under the new president, Ahmed al-Shara. Several eyewitnesses shared suspicions with CNN that the government's entry to Suwaida was a pretext to tighten control.
This attack on Suwaida was carried out by members of the Syrian Ministry of Defense and the Syrian Ministry of Interior. They relied on foreign terrorist mercenary militias. It was a systematic sectarian killing targeting the province of Suwaida. Executions on the ground.
Syria's president maintained that the military was operating in Suwaida to de-escalate tensions and denounced the crimes that unfolded in the process, without specifying whether his forces were complicit.
The Syrian state is committed to protecting minorities and religious communities throughout the country. It remains determined to hold accountable all those involved in crimes against the nation and will not allow anyone to escape justice. We denounce all crimes that have occurred, whether inside or outside Suwaida.
Yet the UN, human rights groups and witnesses on the ground told another story. A story of fear, humiliation, and a city dragged into violence it never sought. The warning signs were visible months prior, after waves of sectarian violence against Syria's Alawite and Christian religious minorities. Then, across Syria, spontaneous protests erupted with chants calling for the Druze to be wiped out. Syrian government-aligned military personnel shouted slurs, promising humiliation, not protection.
They entered in indescribable numbers, killed our sons, killed our women, burned our homes and displaced us. They deprived us of water. They deprived us of everything.
More than 30 villages burned to the ground and roughly 175,000 families forced from their homes, carrying little more than what they could hold, according to the UN. Possibly the youngest victim, a 3-month-old baby. Her father telling CNN she was killed alongside her mum. UN experts reporting hundreds more killed, wounded, abducted and allegations of rape. They are in contact with Syrian officials with no updates as of yet.
Many victims fell because of systemic killings accompanied by torture. Alongside all this came looting and arson. These buildings stand before you now. They burn it until it turns black like the darkness of their hearts.
Video obtained by CNN showing churches set ablaze, along with Druze shrines and temples, sacred places reduced to ash. What began as the promise of protection left behind devastation, grief and a community wondering why it was targeted at all. The violence drew in a key power just beyond Syria's borders, with a long-standing interest in Suwaida. Israel launched airstrikes, claiming to protect the Druze community, while Damascus's operations inside Suwaida were backed by its top ally, Turkey. Caught in between were the people of Suwaida, watching as they felt their province turned into a battleground of regional agendas. By July the 20th, a ceasefire was cemented between Syrian government forces, Israel, the Druze and Bedouins. Damascus withdrew its troops, but the scars remain. Grief rippling from village to village, touching nearly every family. A humanitarian crisis still unfolds. Centuries of history lost in hours. Yet amid the devastation, people endure, burying their dead, tending to the wounded, clinging to fragments of daily life. For Suwaida and Syrians across the country, this feels like a turning point. Will it lead to autonomy, federalism, or another cycle of repression? The answer hangs in the balance, suspended between hope and fear.
Gareth Brown, who is the Economist's Syria correspondent, who captured the sentiment of this week well. Quote, Mr. Shara's legacy at home will not come from a podium in New York. Gareth, it's good to have you. Thanks for joining us. Let's start by unpacking this gruesome violence in Suwaida. You and I talked at the time, back in July. This was, of course, the Druze. Just how deep is mistrust at this point in al-Shara's government?
Well, I think from the Druze perspective, I'll paraphrase a businessman I spoke to recently. It's not a case of a lack of trust. There is no trust at all. And I think for a lot of the Druze in Suwaida, since the violence in July, really they see Ahmed Shara's government in Damascus as an existential threat. And the key here is that you have two parties who are sort of speaking different languages. And you know, from conversations I've had with ministers in Damascus, people close to al-Shara, close to the government, people trying to mediate, is they simply don't understand how they are perceived through Druze eyes since the violence in Suwaida, and that's as an existential threat to the Druze community. And you know, it seems like every effort that Damascus puts into trying to somehow reconcile or bring Suwaida back to within the orbit of the central government of Syria, they push it further away. They use certain individuals, Druze individuals, who are really kryptonite within their own community. And I don't think that Damascus really has a realistic understanding of how it's viewed in Suwaida or how to even go about reconciling with that Druze community in the south.
Whether or not it prosecutes the crimes that unfolded there, of course, still outstanding. You wrote in your piece about Trump's Syria envoy, Tom Barak, that he is, quote, Mr. Shara's biggest champion in Washington, but even he admits that if another Suwaida occurs, when Mr. Shara lost control of his security forces, the love-in could fizzle
another such episode would probably mean that sanctions would remain. Those lobbying for him will find it much harder if he continues to make mistakes at home. Are these mistakes? Can he actually crack down on extremist fighters at this point?
I think only he knows the answer to that, and you know, if he wants to crack down on, you know, those armed groups, those actors who were really responsible for the brunt of the violence, not just in Sueda but also in the coastal massacres in March, then he needs to do more to broaden his community, his coalition. You know, when he came into power in December, he promised this inclusive government. He promised to try to bring people in to the umbrella, into his tent, and actually the opposite seems to have happened, and he's increasingly reliant on this sort of Sunni tribal base at the cost of, you know, relations with Syria's various minority communities, whether it's the Druze or the Alawites. And you know, the Syrian strategy, his strategy so far has been all about America. Get America on board, get the Caesar Act lifted, get the sanctions lifted, and if you can win America over, then you can get the Syrian economy going and everything will fall into place. That's all been well, and he's actually been quite successful. He deserves credit for that strategy. But it's come at the expense of dealing with these problems at home.